Today's game is easily one of the most beloved video games ever made, Chrono Trigger. The praise this game receives has been echoing in the Video Game Hall of Fame for 30 years now, but nostalgia can cloud our memory of older titles. Is this game still as good as we remember it if you're playing it for the first time in 2025? Let's take a look. This video was also just an excuse to show off this Chrono Trigger embroidery my wife made me for the game shelf. So sick. Chrono Trigger's development was a perfect storm of unbelievable talents in all sectors coming together in unprecedented fashion. More so than any other game I've literally ever seen. The game had 3 directors, Takashi Tokita, who was lead designer for Final Fantasy IV and went on to work on Final Fantasy VII. We also have Yoshinori Kitase, director of Final Fantasy VI, and later Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and X. And lastly, Akihiko Matsui, battle designer for Final Fantasy IV and V. Chrono Trigger's lead designer was none other than Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy himself. Lead artist on the project was the late and truly great Akira Toriyama, creator of all things Dragon Ball, famed artist of Dragon Quest, and cultivator of millions of awesome childhood memories around the world. May he rest in peace. Oh, and the soundtrack? How about Yasunori Mitsuda of the Xeno series and Nobuo Uematsu of Final Fantasy fame? Not to mention 1,000 other gems, both being credited as composers here. Uematsu came in to finish the work of Mitsuda due to some health issues. The entire project, just to top it all off, was also supervised by Yuji Horii, the creator of Dragon Quest. This is literally like the Avengers of Japanese media in the 90s, the JRPG Expendables cast, coming together to do a legendary project together. There was really no doubt something special was going to be cooked up here with all the perfect ingredients being added together like this, and yeah, let's just say they didn't disappoint. Now, if you want to play this game yourself, the baseline legal version these days is probably the Steam version, and it's fine, though some cursory research suggests that it still crashes a bit, and it requires some patching to be at its best. It's not ideal, but it works. Outside of that, there's the original Super Nintendo cartridge and its eye-watering price tag. You could grab the PlayStation 1 port as the cheapest physical option, but the insufferable load times supposedly make the game nearly unplayable by modern standards. However, this version used the disc space to include the first instance of anime cutscenes in a few spots, which is a cool inclusion, and ultimately it's an option to consider just to get a copy on the shelf if you're a collector. You could grab the Nintendo DS version, with a slightly less eye-watering cartridge price tag, but still painful, and you'll need a DS or 3DS to play it. It also has the cutscenes, by the way, and that's about it. You can play it on your phone, I guess. A lot of people go that route, it's fine. Ultimately, you can play a semi-broken digital version. You can pay some random dude on eBay a ton of money and hope the cartridge works, or
That's got to be the best
gamer
I've ever seen.
So it would seem.
I don't own the original cartridge because, yikes, that price tag, so I use this Super EverDrive cartridge to play on original hardware. You just load your definitely legally obtained game ROMs onto an SD card and stick it in the top slot there, and they boot right up. This EverDrive version that I'm using is the X5. It's one of the cheaper ones, and it usually costs between $60 to $70 US, depending on the retailer, but do your own research on the various options before you dive in on one of those. Just don't buy one of those prepackaged multi-carts from Amazon. I had very poor success with games bugging out on those and saves corrupting. The story begins with Chrono, our generic sort of protagonist. We'll meet who I consider to be the true hero of this story later, being awakened by his mom as she draws the curtains on our adventure and reminds Chrono to meet his friend Luca over at the fairgrounds. We make our way over there and are greeted with fun fanfare, some foreshadowing, and a few little mini-games we can participate in until, oops, we bump into a lovely lady that drops her pendant. Already the game displays its mastery of show, don't tell. We aren't specifically told to pick up the pendant or what to do with it, and for those that do some exploration, you'll find that you can actually attempt to sell it to an old man who has his eye on it. But he can't actually buy it, and unbeknownst to us, now We'd find later that this actually has a minor effect on events that play out later. This theme of the game's path altering and showing the results of choices you've made along the way, it's something we appreciate seeing in game design today, but this was the true pioneer. Multiple endings, New Game Plus, it all started here. And on the Super Nintendo, no less. It's crazy. But I digress. Ultimately, Marl, our new friend, ends up with her necklace, and after learning a bit about her vivacious and strong-willed personality, we advance to meet Luca. Our dear friend Luca is an inventor and engineer of sorts, and has finally mastered a teleportation pad. Demonstrating its incredible power using Chrono as a guinea pig, it successfully completes its live trial and teleports Chrono. Well, all that teleporting looks awfully fun, so Marl hops on for a try, and unfortunately, the mysterious necklace has a bizarre interaction with the teleportation process, and poof! Marl disappears, the pendant she wore bouncing to the ground as the last trace of her existence. Springing into action, Chrono repeats the process in hopes of locating Marl, teleporting himself back in time to 600 AD, and demonstrating the time travel framework the game is based around. Hence the word chrono in the title, chronos being Greek for time. Time travel may be a bit of a tired trope to some nowadays, and it comes with some tricky world building and choice and consequence implications, obviously, but it's done pretty well here, and it was wild at the time. Seeing the world change as we travel through the millennia really does make the world feel bigger, and the ability to fight the final boss at any point in time, beating Breath of the Wild's innovative design by 25 years, really does show the focus on player agency and how they choose to approach the story. From here, we truly begin our grand quest, meeting lovable characters like Isla, Robo, and the true protagonist of this story in my opinion, Frog, who has one of the sickest introductions in a game I can remember, with a suitably awesome theme to boot. We embark on a quest that starts with saving Marl and deciphering this time travel nonsense to saving the entire world from an entity named Lavos, with tons of memorable characters and quests along the way. Lavos remains one of the best antagonists in video games. It's a primal, world-ending, apocalyptic monster that cannot be stopped or reasoned with, and its threat persists across the millennia with terrifying, looming inevitability. If you're not picking this up yet, this game's story and characters rule, even by modern standards. And I forgot at times that this was a 30-year-old game, just due to the tight pacing and exhilarating twists with real consequences throughout a modest 20 to 25 hour runtime. Chrono Trigger was a super late release on the Super Nintendo, debuting just a year before the Nintendo 64's release, and graphically it feels like the culmination of everything this team had learned across the half-decade lifespan of the console. Bright colors, excellent varied combat animations, moving character sprites, occasional Mode 7 effects, a traversable overworld, viewable party sprites. This is everything you could want in a 16-bit game, polished and then polished again. It's damn near perfect visually. And speaking to audio, Chrono Trigger really has some nice sound design. Great ambient tracks that help sell the world you're in, a nice mix of combat sounds with the special tech attacks having their own unique sounds and presentation. But the highlight of the audio experience is going to be the soundtrack. It's unbelievably solid, and still rips so hard, even just through basic TV speakers. Though I was upsampling it like a complete heathen using an old receiver I found, and that gave me artificial 5.1 surround sound while I was playing on my 32-inch Toshiba CRT, and my god, what an experience. Chrono Trigger was an innovator in a major way. It was the first time we ever saw a New Game Plus option in a game. It was also the first game where your actions affected future, and sometimes even past, events. It was almost the first, Earthbound beat it by a couple of months, to transition from exploration directly to combat on the open world, instead of using random encounters. And it was the first to have multiple endings. Almost everything you see in modern JRPGs, and RPGs in general, were influenced by Chrono Trigger. Now, being first at something doesn't necessarily mean you did it well. And yet, all of these were near-perfect implementations here that still stand as a benchmark for modern gaming today. The combat in this game is awesome. You'll have the choice at the beginning of the game between the active and wait combat modes. Wait is essentially just traditional turn-based, as the game pauses when you utilize any of the menus, whereas active keeps the battle moving in real time, as the enemies keep attacking you, and your ATB gauges fill until they cap, requiring some resource management from the player. Ultimately, the default active mode was my preference, and it serves to spice up the turn-based system in the game in a way that honestly still feels solid and more innovative than some modern titles today. Initiating battles is also unique here, as, again, outside of Earthbound, this is the first time random battles were just not really a thing. Instead, encounters occur when you physically run into monsters out in the world, or walk through a designated trigger location and monsters pop out at you. It initiates a battle right there on the same area map seamlessly instead of spiraling into a separate battle screen. Enemies will move around the map as they fight you in combat as well, so there's some strategy to planning your area of effect attacks as a result, as how many enemies you'll hit may change based on their position. There's a level of care put into these details here that we still rarely see, and it just goes to show the level of innovation and polish the team was reaching for here. Looking at the game's performance, there's really not much to report here. The game runs at 60 frames per second, 50 if you're in the PAL regions, almost all the time, though rarely you'll see a little animation slowdown if there's a lot going on. I noticed it during some of the flasher moves in combat, some of the boss attacks, but it's functionally inconsequential as it didn't affect the actual gameplay experience basically at all. Listen, I'm biased. I love retro games, and I love JRPGs, obviously. Also, I'm a 90s kid, and my first console I personally owned was a Super Nintendo. Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball Z was also a huge deal for me growing up, and his art style just clicks with me. I did not, however, play this game for the first time until 2023. I wasn't blinded by nostalgia for the title. It was brand new to me, and it sold me on its merit alone. This is one of the finest RPGs of all time. And despite the extreme hype it gets, and some people maybe leaning towards it being a little overrated, I think it's justified. It's not an easy feat for a 30-year-old RPG with no voice acting to capture a modern audience so inundated with content by algorithms. And yet when I played this game, everything else was quiet. It reminded me, in a very distinct way, what gaming back in the 90s was all about. And it really ignited a spark to revisit some more of these timeless classics. If you haven't played it, play it, by any means necessary. Thanks for watching.